In the second segment, we'll begin our guided tour of medical software. We're going to do the first half in this segment and the second half in the following segment, and we're going to walk through the process and give you some highlights. These are all topics that we will revisit in the remainder of this class. So we will start, as all of these things start, with the regulatory process. And in the regulatory process, this is a figure from the IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, we have a classification of software from class 1 to class 4, depending on the risk involved. So if you take the software and we classify it according to two variables, it's the importance of the information that the software provides to the doctor. So is it actually immediately affecting diagnosis up here, or is it simply informing clinical management down the road? And the severity of the situation of the patient. Are we talking about somebody who's in a non-serious situation, or are we talking about somebody who's in a very critical condition? So if the software is, the further you go to the upper left, the classification goes from 1 to 4. And the regulatory process will change as you move from a low-risk piece of software, class 1, to a high-risk piece of software, class 4. And this affects everything we will talk about. So the risk classification of the software defines the rest of the process. And we'll come back to risk classification multiple times. They're slightly different systems, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, A, B, and C, but the fundamental principle is the same. Low risk, low requirements, high risk, high requirements. The next step, in addition to the regulatory environment, in week 3 here, we will talk about the healthcare environment and data privacy and security. So in the healthcare environment, we have all these players that are involved in the delivery of healthcare. We have points of care, doctors, hospitals, we have payers, whether it's insurance companies or governments, clinical support, business associates, IT services, others, potentially law firms, life insurance companies. All of those people may be your customers, may be your users when you work in medical software. So keep that in mind. It's not just doctors and nurses, there's a lot more. And the second part is the data privacy and security issues that happen in the medical space. So these 5 points are the 5 steps in the NIST framework for cybersecurity: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And we'll talk about data privacy, security, cybersecurity, and that will come in week 3 of this class. With that, we're ready to start now thinking about how to organize the process. And the next step is a quality management system. This is the rule book for a company, and this divides into 3 levels: the discussion of the leadership of the company and the support, personnel, infrastructure, work environment. The second level is the support processes, how the company does planning, measurements, configuration, documentation. All of those are processes that are the same for all software projects. And then the inner loop is a process specific to our specific software project. So requirements, deployment, maintenance, retirement, design, all of that above. And again, this comes from a regulatory document from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. The QMS is what defines how a company operates. And remember, we're doing serious projects, often dealing with people who are very sick, and serious software requires serious processes, and this is our rule book. The next step, and we're still in week 4 of the class, is the other part of the management standards, of what's called the management standards, is the risk management process. And anytime you see this symbol here, the radiation symbol there, we're going to be talking about risk management, and it will be a companion throughout this class. So we'll talk about risk analysis, identifying what can go wrong, evaluating how bad can it get, risk control, what can we do to reduce the level, to reduce how bad it could be, and then the evaluation of what's the risk that's left after we've taken our measures. So anytime you see this icon up there, we'll be talking about risk management. And risk management will be our ever-present companion in this class. We'll be talking about risk management when we design our software. We'll be talking about risk management when we code our software. We'll be talking about risk management when we test our software, when we install our software, when we retire software. Every step of the process, we'll always ask the question, what can go wrong here? And at that point, we'll engage in a risk management process, because that's how serious projects work. We'll talk about the medical software lifecycle. We'll begin this process in week 5 and work our way down this V model. And each of those things that you see here, each of those circled things, will be a week of this class. So we'll talk about user needs and system requirements, software design, implementation, and testing, validation, deployment, maintenance, and retirement. And this will stay with us. Now, underlying this process, of course, is the quality management system and the risk management. Those are the supporting infrastructure that allow this to happen. Outside of a quality management system and the risk management system, this life cycle makes no sense. And this is what's known by the standards. To illustrate the process, we'll do a case study, and we'll use it to explain how software is designed and to some extent implemented. And we're going to use this case study of image-guided neurosurgery. It's an area I've worked a little bit before. And think about an image-guided neurosurgery system as a GPS-type system for brain surgery. It allows the surgeon to see images of the patients at the same time as when they're operating. So here's what the system looks like. It's a picture of a brain lab system from Yale New Haven Hospital. You can see the screens here. So this is the software. At the top, we have these cameras that will be looking at the surgical tools. So here's a zoom-up picture of our surgeon. He's holding a tool in his hand here. This is the patient. This is an exposed brain. If you've never seen exposed brain, that's an exposed brain. This is a surgical pointer. So when he touches the pointer, these sensors here are tracked by the camera, and the position of this pointer is shown on the screen. So the surgeon knows where they are at any given point. And this allows them to organize the surgery to know how far they are to the left or to the right or any kind else. So this is our case study. We'll use it to identify user needs, requirements to design our software, and this will follow us for a few of the weeks of this class. So the first step of the process is to figure out what our users need. Now, you can go and talk to your users, and they might tell you what they need, or they might tell you what they think they need. And most of the time, that you're going to get the immediate information. This is what's bothering me right now. This is what I think my problem is. Your job now as a designer is to take that information and abstract it and figure out what is it that they really need. So if we look at this chart, and this comes from a book by Robertson and Robertson on the requirements process, you'll see that the process starts with this thing called how now. We are at the bottom of this pile scale. How are the users doing what they're doing right now? So you go, you observe them, you look at what they do, you ask them questions. But really your challenge is to go from how now to what now. So you want to move from this concrete phase down here, this is the concrete, to the abstract. If we take a simple example that I will return to multiple times in this class, how now may be that they're using a lawnmower to cut their grass, but really what now, they just want their grass to be short. So if they had another way to keep their grass short, maybe they'd be just as happy. So we're moving from how now, the details of what's going on, what you can observe, to what now, getting an understanding of what's going on. And then what now becomes to what future? What more would they like to be able to do? Again, at this abstract level, not only do I want my grass to be short, but I want it to look a certain way. I want to have a certain color. And then we use that information to go back to the real world, into the concrete space, to think about how future. What are we going to design? How is our design going to develop to allow our user not only to do what they need to do now, but what they would like to do in the future? And so we are going to have this constant interplay between the concrete and the abstract in this business. Embedded in this problem is this challenge of communication. And the way I understand this, the easiest way to explain it, is this children's game called Telephone. You may have played it as children yourselves. We have 4 children in a row, as illustrated in this picture. And the first child whispers something in the ear of the second child, say computer bag. The second child tries to whisper to the third child what they heard, tumor slag, computer bus, river mag. And at the end of the game, the last child tells the first child what they heard, and they compare, and they all have a good laugh. And it's all very funny, and it leads to lots of amusement. But let's transpose that now into our world. The first child here might be a user. This is what they need. The second child here is our analyst, the person who goes and talks to the user and tries to figure out what the user needs. The third user might be a senior software engineer who has to design the software. And maybe a fourth user is a programmer who has to implement the software. The challenge in this process is that what the programmer produces should match what the user needs. Obviously, if we end up in a situation like the game of Telephone, where what the programmer produces only vaguely resemble what the user needs, we have failed. So this is part of this problem of checks and balances, of documentation, of reviews, of written documents, written designs that are necessary to ensure that our final piece of software meets the needs of our user. Because if it doesn't, we may have a perfectly good piece of software that's utterly useless for the needs of our user. So an example that people give is, our user wanted a car, and we've designed the best bicycle in the world, still not a car. So we have to be careful. So these issues of communication are critical, and it's a challenge in any multidisciplinary setting, any place where lots of people are involved. The way we think about the needs of the user is through the use of usage scenarios. And a way to understand usage scenarios, again, to use another children's game, this is a game Clue or Cluedo that some of you may have played as children. It's a family favorite in our family, is to think about this game where the goal is to figure out who performed a murder in which room with what type of weapon. And so people navigate across this board, they get to check, they ask questions, and it goes on and on. So here's a classic solution. Here the solution is that Colonel Mustard did the murder in the ballroom with a rope. So this is the proposed solution to this problem. Now, if you look at this example, you're seeing who, where, and with what. Now, the missing aspect of this is the what. What did Colonel Mustard do? Well, Colonel Mustard, of course, did a murder, but this is the basis of us understanding usage scenario in the real world. A neurosurgeon would like to be able to do tumor resection in the operating room, and they're using a touchscreen computer in addition to their surgical tools. Who, what, where, and with what? Those are the basic questions that we use to identify what our usage scenario. This is the basis for our software design. So in the beginning, you have to identify who your users are, what they want to do, where they're doing it, what tools do they need to use, what other constraints they are under, and that's incredibly important. So to just make it more concrete, who, what, where, and with what, back to clue, our user is a neurosurgeon. The what, to navigate during a brain epilepsy neurosurgery procedure, this means being able to see the position of the surgical pointer on the anatomical MRI image of the patient, the intended use environment in the operating room, using a touchscreen computer mounted at eye level. So this defines the usage scenario, and from here now, we can think about designing our software. So what do we need to do in order to accomplish, to implement this usage scenario? Well, one of the things we need to be able to do is get the anatomical MR images, right? They're part of the description. And so the usage scenario naturally leads us to the requirement. So here's the first requirement. The system shall, this is the magic formulation, it's like the 10 Commandments, shall be able to successfully import images from the hospital database service called the PACS. If you need to navigate on top of images, you need the images. So a requirement, the thing that the software must do, and we'll have a long list of these requirements, one of them is they have to be able to get an image. So this concludes the first half of the medical software tour. We've gotten up to the point of what does our software need to do in an abstract sense. In the next segment, we'll take a look at the back end of this process, and from what the software needs to be able to do, we'll figure out how it will be doing, how we'll test it, and all the other things that are involved in this process.